company, Hand Grove, to create and sell hemp particle board or a substitute for wood products. And that's what I do. I'm going to go down the line and have the rest of the panel introduce yourselves. Let us know who you are and what you do.
Hi, I'm Chad Rosen, representing Victory Hemp Foods from Carrollton, Kentucky. We receive hemp grain, combine-grade hemp grain from farmers all across the Midwest, and we process it into nutritious food products. And we have some proprietary technology that allows us to segment the different components of the proteins and the oils for formulators to make products that consumers love. So you can find us on the web at victoryhempfoods.com.
Mark Samuels, co-founder of Primordia, based out of the Imperial Valley here. We are a vertically integrated hemp processing and cultivation company. I've been doing this since January of 2019 and got some crops we've harvested and got stuff still going in the ground now, and in the middle of building a large processing facility to basically take everything from soil to oil. So excited to be here.
Hi, I'm Eric Miller. I am principal scientist for Imperial CBD Extraction, a subsidiary of Brawley Badlands, who John and Andrew Courier are the owners and farmers of local hemp crop. John was on a panel earlier today. We are also integrated, and I am building out a facility as well, where we'll be extracting our own crop as well as toll processing to produce hemp oil and CBD isolate in bulk, and then taking those further into formulations and white labeling and branding. Great to be here.
Hello, Matt McClain with Buenaventura Coast. I've actually had quite a bit of my background in hemp fiber and textiles, and have been focused on that with my company Recreator Hemp Apparel from 2013 to this past year. I've diversified more into cultivation and some vertically integrated solutions for California farmers. I also sit on the Industrial Hemp Advisory Board with the CDFA with Lawrence and John Courier as well. That's about it.
All right, thank you very much, guys. All right, so this panel is about post-processing of the hemp. So you have to look at the farmer. When they grow the hemp, they're going to be growing it either for flour, they're going to be growing it for fiber, or they're going to be growing it for grain/seed. So I think the first question I'd like to ask people on our panel here is, let's say, Chad is expert on working with the seed or the grain. My first question for the panelists is, what form do you want the farmers to give it to you? I mean, for example, if you're getting the seed, how do you want it delivered to you? For the flour, Mark and Eric, how would you want that delivered to you? And for Matt, fiber, what form are you going to want it directly from the farmer? So go ahead, Chad.
So that's a good question, and I think it's a good indication to what you should do if you're thinking about growing this crop. Talk to your processors. Likely the person that's going to be buying your crop is going to have a contract, and that contract is going to spell out exactly how they want it. For instance, we have a contract that specifies what the microbial contents are, what the yeast, mold, listeria, E. coli, the rest of the microbials are, as well as what size we'll tolerate or accept, what purity of the seed, and then what moisture content. And I'm happy to share those details if anyone's interested in growing. But typically how it works is farmers combine their hemp, the grain off the top of the flower heads. They separate the flowers from the seeds, and then they store those seeds in their bins, or they run them through a typical corn dryer and blow air on them if they're using a flat bottom bin to dry the grain down to like a 9%, anything under 9%. From there, it runs over to an aggregator or a seed cleaner who's running it over a 2 or 3 stage screen cleaner like a Crippen or a Clipper, and they're getting it to a 99% purity, and they're removing all the small particulate. as well as all the flour. Then they deliver it to us, and we can receive it in either super sacks or hopper bottom bins. I'm happy to get granular with you, but I think the purpose of the question is a good one. What does the market want? And we have extremely tight specifications with which we'll accept or reject loads, and that's really driven by what we need to achieve our final product. It has to have the right amount of protein, the right amount of protein and oil, and also not have the microbials, because those will carry through to our finished good products, and then our product would be out of spec from there. So it's somewhat of a cascading effect, and certainly I think the most important thing you can do is talk to your processors.
So for CBD production, there's one main factor that should be paramount in your mind, which is more flour, less stems and stalks. And when you talk about mechanical harvesting, you're inevitably going to get a lot of stems in your biomass. So all that's going to do is take your CBD percentage down, and make it harder to dry, longer to dry, and also harder to process. So for us, with the farmers that we're working with, having the highest CBD percentage possible is what you should be really looking to do. Other things that we're kind of looking for, obviously we're going to have COAs that are going to be tested multiple times during the flower stage of the crop. So before we even ingest the biomass, we're going to want to have full documentation on where the crop is at. In terms of seed, there's multiple ways to do it, and I think at scale, it still really isn't figured out completely yet. So you can combine harvest it, and you can take that stream out and provide seed there. Or there's individual machines that can take it in a less destructive fashion, and generally that's going to help with your germ rates and give you a higher priced product. So those are the two main things in terms of CBD production and seed, I'd say.
I totally agree about the COAs. Those are going to tell us pretty much everything I need to know from a processor's standpoint. Potency, of course, higher CBD percentage coming in means more yield, but also pesticides. If you have pesticides in there, that's going to be needed to be remediated, and that's going to be another process that's going to cost more money down the road. Also, THC percentage. If it tests hot in the field, it's going to probably demand a more rigorous remediation process than something that tested below 0.3. Obviously, microbials, and that's going to be going to affect downstream processing. But I think COAs is the most important thing. Also depends on what you want on the as your product. If it's just CBD isolate, then perhaps pesticides and THC is not such a big deal, because the process of crystallization kind of removes that by nature. But there are some remediation concerns that can be addressed when you produce that COA in the very beginning. Ideally, in a physical form, it should be ground up already, dried. You could bring it pelletized, because that's an easier way to store it. We have pellet crumblers that can take it from the pellet form into a powder form. That facilitates extraction, and just be properly stored, transported in a reefer van, and just in super sacks, like mentioned. Those are all good supply chain methods to get it to me or another processor in a quality fashion.
Yeah, I think one of the things you're going to continue to hear on this panel is that the processors need to have the product meet certain specifications, so that when you're planting, you need to have an idea of what market you're trying to attract, or who your processor is going to be on the end. So from a fiber perspective, it really comes down to cultivars and planting density, more so than even your harvest technology. So you're going to want to go in with fiber cultivars at a really densely planted population. even upwards 40,000 to 400,000 plants per acre. If you're trying to produce basically a secondary revenue stream from a CBD product, you're going to want your plant population to be at least 15 to 20,000 plants per acre. If you look at the economics of things, fiber really isn't that established of a market. So, potential CBD returns are 25 grand per acre and up. With fiber, the most value you're going to get for your stock is probably $120 to $150 per ton. And processors such as Basscore or Sunstrand will take that in either a round bale or a small square bale. One of the big points of emphasis on fiber, and I think Larry could attest to this, is how you ret it, what the lignin content is. If there's branching, if there's a lot of branching, it's not going to be suitable for fiber production. Also, if the diameter of the stem is very thick, it's going to make for coarser fiber, and it's just not going to be the textile grade fiber that a Gap or Patagonia or somebody's going to be looking for. In addition, you take into account that Imperial counties, like the rest of California, there's not a whole lot of processing infrastructure here yet. So it might be easiest to take the lowest hanging fruit and then continue to R&D from there on smaller plots or with different varieties.
All right. Thank you, Matt. To talk a little bit more about the fiber, most of the farmers right now aren't growing for flour, but it is leaving a lot of stock in the field right now. And that's actually, it's a dilemma, but it's also going to prove an opportunity because it will be a lot of fiber that's going to be very cheap. So the people that begin to figure out how to utilize it, perhaps for paper or plastic or particle board, are going to be able to get that fiber very cheap, and it would result in people being able to build a processing plant to be able to take that sort of fiber. But that fiber would probably not be able to be used for textiles or anything where you need a very fine type of fiber. My next question I wanted to direct to Mark and Eric, since so many people are growing for CBD, could you discuss the pros and cons of having a farmer grow perhaps each plant individually, directly intending for the flower to get a real high quality flower that's practically hand trimmed versus growing a more dense crop and then harvesting it by mechanically? You talk a little bit like what are the pros and cons of each method and what the farmer can expect out of that?
So there's two ways to do it. You can mechanical combine your fields. That's going to do a few things. That's going to make your life a lot easier, and it'll be a lot less expensive to do it that way versus having a hand harvest where you're going in and having them select individual plants. The downside to doing mechanical harvest is that if you're seeing a crop that's 10% in the field, by the time you get through a mechanical harvest, you might have 5% homogenized CBD percentage, maybe 6 if you're lucky. So I think there's a lot of farmers out there that are assuming that, hey, I've seen a COA that's 10 or 12%, and that's what I should expect, and that's how I'm going to build all my cash flow and projections. But in reality, by the time you go through mechanically harvest, you're not looking at that percentage. So that's a really important factor. The second way to do it is a hand harvest. When you do it this way, you are going to see a higher CBD percentage because, I should say, just because you hand harvest it, you still need to get the flowers off the stems and stalks. You need to have processing set up after you get the plants out of the field in order to pull the valuable material from the rest of the plant. So that can take form in various types of shucking mechanisms. There are machines from the cannabis space that take plants, stems, and they pull the leaves and branches off. So there are ways to do it, but there's not much at scale. So if you're thinking about planting 30 acres or 100 acres or more, you're talking about spending a lot of money on the hand harvest, post-processing side, with the actual harvest, the labor, and the drying, versus mechanical might be $500 an acre or less to get that done. So a lot of variables and a lot of different things you can do, and it comes down to how much CBD you want in the source material that's going to go to your extractor.
Well, I'm definitely not an expert in agricultural harvesting, but I do know that, well, I agree with what he mentioned about the trade-offs between mechanical and hand harvesting. Mechanically, it's going to put more stress on the plant. It's going to knock those trichomes off, and you'll end up with lower CBD percentage, whereas hand harvest is much more gentle and more usually really takes care of most of the plant, and you're not gonna, since you're hand harvesting, you're gonna put down something, tarps or whatever, to collect those trichomes so that they don't just end up in the dirt. And it's an efficiency thing. Hand harvesting is definitely not a scaled practice, whereas mechanical, and a lot of it is getting it out of the ground, getting off the ground if you're field drying, and getting it dried and processed as quickly as possible to prevent mold or any type of other contamination. So whereas we'd all love to hand harvest, it's just not practical. There's a lot of companies out there, big agricultural companies, that are trying to develop machinery and farm equipment to solve these problems. And it's pretty exciting to see what these new innovations are. They're coming out with new stuff. It seems like every other week. So we're excited to use it out in the fields.
Yeah. Follow Chad.
So we had a professor in Kentucky, Dr. David Williams. He just passed, but he had a good statement that I'll butcher. And the question really relates to what the end use of the product is. So if you're growing for the flower, then absolutely you should be growing for the flower. You should be hand harvesting. You should be taking care of it. But if the goal of the market is that one molecule, then there's much, much, much more efficient ways in which to grow the crop. And as growers here, and I don't know how many are growers versus processors versus marketers, but you have to be thinking about how quick this market's moving and how quickly legislation is opening up new supply chains across the country and what that's going to do to cost of goods. In the Midwest, you have Missouri coming online, you have Iowa coming online, you have Kansas coming online. Obviously, Colorado's been growing for a while. And it's the difference between growing a 500,000 plant population with maybe a 2 to 3% CBD content, but when it all gets boiled down, concentrated down into a tincture, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. Now, there's certainly market economics that are playing a part in what the concentration of that CBD molecule is. But when you look at how many molecules you can get off the field, you have to be very cognizant about what your strategy is going to be going forward. And we see a lot of the brands that actually built the CBD industry, the Elixinols and the CB Sciences of the world, they still get their supply chain in large part still comes from the European model of growing 500,000 to 800,000 plant populations in 1 acre, and then harvesting it with a combine and distilling it down through massive CO2 extractors. And that model is extremely profitable. So keep in mind, not only what you're doing today and what you know, and what equipment you have around you, but where the market might go as you kind of educate yourself. And just, I always like to say, keep that in mind. And I also, share that point as someone who gets all of their supply chain from, we contract 5,000 acres, and while that might seem like a lot, it's not a lot. It's a grain on the sand. It's a grain of sand on the beach of agriculture, right? There's 180 million acres of corn and soy that are grown in the U.S. every day, and we grow in the same methodology of row crops. So if we're able to splice in a genetic that has maybe 4 to 5% CBD, well, that would offer a very diverse crop for a farmer. So keep in mind the diversity that exists in the plant when we start to talk about optimization.
Yeah, and I'd just like to piggyback on what Chad said. Basically, there's two models that have been successful to date in Europe and America. It's either the horticultural model, which is more tobacco-style farming, 2,500, 3,000 plants per acre, maybe up to 10,000, and then the larger systems, which are requiring mechanical harvesting technologies, which are very limited. So you look at some of the technology that's available out there, whether it's a modified John Deere combine, whether it's the formation ag header, kind of a forager header, or some of the other applicable technologies. And also, like you said, look at what's available in the county. I farm mostly in Ventura County. Everything is hand harvested there. We don't have combines. So for Ventura County to put in 4,000 acres of hemp and then decide how they're going to harvest has created some unique problems, but also some unique possibilities for certain people. So, when you're creating, when you're farming for flower for either isolate or distillate, either market, either harvesting technology is available. It will work for you. One thing that I think we haven't spoke much about is smokable flower, where that's actually where you can see some of the highest returns. And obviously anything of that nature, you'd want to go out early, collect your tops, hand harvest, cure, dry, and then go forward from there.
All right. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Thank you, gentlemen. All right, so we're talking a little bit about some of the products that can be created, whether it's a seed oil, whole hemp seeds, smokable flour, extracts, even all the way to a food product or textiles and things like that. Do you think that this is an area where the farmer could begin to get into it, at least a little bit, to try to have a more of a vertically integrated company? Say the farmer would actually grow the crop and produce its own CBD product, or grow the crop and produce its own seed oil, or grow the crop and be able to extract the fiber and sell the raw fiber from decortication. Do you think this is a possibility for the farmers, or do you think it would be better for the farmer just to focus on growing the plant? And what would your opinion of that be? Chad, you want to take it?
Yeah, from the perspective of grain, I think farmers. It's not something that farmers are going to be making products on farm, because we're selling product that's at its highest price point, $5 a pound for a protein powder. So the unit economics and the scale that you have to be manufacturing in order to be profitable, I don't think they're really there for on-farm production. Certainly, if the farmer's growing for grain and they have some livestock, I think it makes sense to maybe have a on-farm oil press and expeller press and be making some seed cake to offer rations for some of your livestock. But for the grain side of things, I think farmers are it's busy. You can't boil the ocean. That's why we contract farmers. We could try to do everything under the sun, but there's a level of efficiency, and right now, because there's a gap in the marketplace and the supply chain at multiple levels, certainly there's an opportunity because the market's so inefficient, there's an opportunity to be made in a lot of different places of the supply chain. But as we move forward, I think you're going to see a condensation of prices at every level of the supply chain, and for that you're going to have to be really efficient and understand what your customer needs, what the market needs, and how you can be best at doing what you do. With CBD, I think I would, if you're growing for CBD, I'd probably modify that answer, and then it's really up to the entrepreneurial appetite of that farmer. Some farmers want to have a roadside stand, some want to go to the farmer's market, some just want to put eggs in a 12-pack. So it's up to the individual, I would say.
For CBD production, similar to grain, I'd say, in the sense that to do this at scale where you are producing an extract of any amount of volume, call it 30 liters, 50 liters, 100 liters, you're talking about a significant investment in capital into the extraction equipment. So I think for the most part, farmers will ultimately be growing for biomass and then selling to extractors, and or partnering with those extractors in some kind of rev share model in order to do so. If I had a recommendation for any farmers out there looking to become more vertically integrated, I would say the probably easiest way to do that would be to go for smokable. There's a lot of work that's been done on the cannabis side to harvest and cure and dry that stuff, and that is a piece of the market that is certainly exploding along with the other parts of the market, but doesn't require expensive extraction equipment and the investment there. The other thing I'd say about trying to become vertically integrated is that the FDA is going to be coming in and opining on their regulations really here in the next, I think it's the next 90 days is what has been mandated by Congress. So once that happens, our thinking is that it's going to go the way of traditional pharma and food safety. So there's going to be a tremendous amount of compliance, traceability, SOPs that are going to be required in order to have a integrated system that can process all the way to a finished product or even a bulk extract. So it's a pretty heavy burden on your everyday farmer to go through all that, and it's probably not worth the hassle.
Yeah, it's one thing to build an extraction facility when there isn't a regulation framework in place, but as he can attest, building an extraction facility to comply with GMP regulations is a whole another bag of worms, and building it to a dietary supplement, let's say 21 CFR 111, is much easier to do than building it to pharma regs, which is 210 and 211. Much more rigorous. The infrastructure you have to build, everything, the floors, the ceilings, the walls, everything has to comply with good manufacturing practices, which is a whole lot of money to do and a big headache. So it's more than just putting in, a rosin press in a room, or even an ethanol extractor or a CO2 extractor, which, by the way, once you get to the latter parts of that, it's a big capital expenditure. So extraction facility is a lot of work and it's a lot of money. So the smokable market is a great way to unload your product. It's getting really good prices right now. We'll see how that goes in the next month or two. But I think that's a good way to mitigate the risk when you. I think it's going to go down.
Here, talk to the microphone.
So if your business plan is contingent on smokable flower, you should definitely have an asterisk in that, because with those USDA regulations coming out, there's a lot of chatter around the fact that the smokable flower market is going to get shut down. So I share that with you. If you're running down that path, just be very cognizant of, we still don't have clear legislation on smokable flower.
Well,
so I don't know where that flower market's going to go,
and right now too, it's state to state. So you have states like Indiana, Kentucky, North Carolina who have or are trying to outlaw smokable flower, even under 0.3% THC. Obviously, the cannabis market in California is a little bit more established, but in the same respect, if you look at the recent proposed legislation, that's something that's not included now.
Regulations aside, I mean, the influx of all this biomass that's coming out, I mean, I think it's fetching $200 a pound right now for smokable. I think that's going to go down by a lot, and then you're going to have to adjust your business model based on real prices after you harvest, which is changing every day. So.
Smokable flower, are you referring to the leaf? How about smokable, like vaping? How
question was, when we talk about smokable flower, are we talking about actually smoking, combusting the leaf and the bud, or are we talking about vaping? Myself, and I think the others, are talking about smoking, combusting, and hemp cigarettes. Vape or nugs, yeah.
Yeah, jarred flower in nug form, like that you can buy at a smoke shop, or pre-rolled cigarettes.
Right.
So I'd kind of just echo what these guys are saying. I'd actually, unless you have 1,000 acres, I'd highly discourage attempts at vertical integration. Some early adopters in California who would have otherwise made money decided to try and diversify into extraction methods and double down and ended up losing money. So I think you're hearing these stories kind of widespread. My advice would be to create a shelf-stable product, whether it's seed or flower or biomass, and offload it as soon as possible.
I'll just add one more thing there that smokable flower has a lot of different specs. So biomass that you're going to harvest with a combine out of the field is not smokable flower. And I think a lot of people think that. Smokable flower is really kind of similar to what you would see in a cannabis store, dispensary. And so the buyers on that side of things are expecting that. So if you are going to go into that piece of the market, I would make sure to have a buyer that you're talking to, and really understanding what they're looking for from a specification standpoint. That's CBD percentage, that is it ground, is it trimmed and cured? There's a lot of detail there, so before you wade into that space, definitely try to have a buyer on the tail end.
All right, thank you guys. All right, next question for Chad, since we're talking about processing and manufacturing. Talk a little bit about the end products that you're selling and what has to go into getting the seed to that point.
Sure. So we're a primary ingredient manufacturer. We sell to other food manufacturers, and it all starts with a seed. So we're not excited about this insomnia version of the plant. We like those seeds. We like it when the male pollinates the female and the female produces seed. And so it starts with one of two processes. I wish I had a diagram to make it really easy for you, but we start with one of two processes. After it's cleaned, we hate cleaning. It's a really dirty process, so we work with aggregators, although we have the ability to clean it in-house. But we're either running our seeds through an expeller press, and what that does is it's like a screw press. It presses the oil out of the seed, and you have a cold pressed hemp seed oil. And on the other side of that, you have seed cake, and that's your protein-rich seed cake. It's about 33% protein, and the rest is fiber. And so then we take that stream of the seed cake, and we mill it and we sift it into a 50% protein powder. And so that's the protein powder, that green, gritty protein powder that's on store shelves across North America. You can buy it at Whole Foods, Kroger, and we supply a lot of the brands that are on store shelves and are using it in their products. They use it for protein powders, they use it for nutritional bars, they use it for a number of different applications. The cold pressed hemp seed oil goes to a lot of nutraceuticals, goes to a lot of topical manufacturers. We run it through a filtration process. So those are our basic two products. And then we have a third product that we actually take the shells off it. So we have these little tiny seeds and we have these little tiny shells, and we arduously take them off one by one. No, that's not true. We have a dehuller, and we run it through the dehuller, and it strips all the shells off it. And we have these beautiful hearts. And so the kernel of the hemp seed is amazing for our nutrition. It's a perfect food for humans. It's actually made from a destin and albumin protein, and those proteins are really easy for our body to break down into the individual amino acids. So all 9 essential amino acids is what you hear all the time, and that's contained in that hemp kernel. And the beauty of that is when you take the shell off it and you have this white, light kernel, you have a 40-40 ratio essentially of protein to oil, which is very valuable. And so our technology focuses on separating those
oils and proteins without the shell on it, which is how I explained how we got that cold pressed oil and the green protein powder. And so when we're able to do that, we have a really white, light protein that we're able to concentrate up to 70%. And this is the big idea for the grain market. We've had a lot of challenges getting big market acceptance with hemp protein and cold pressed oil because quite frankly, they don't taste that good. The oil has a lot of chlorophyll in it. The chlorophyll turns into free radicals. It attacks your polyunsaturated fatty acid, leads to rancidity. If you've opened up a bottle of cold-pressed hemp seed oil after maybe 6 months or so not being refrigerated, it'll have a marine smell. It's similar to what happens when you catch a fish, you lay it on the dock, you cut it open, it smells pretty nice. You give it 2 hours, and those polyunsaturated fatty acids have begun to go rancid. So all that to say, what we're able to do when we take the oil out of the kernel is eliminate a lot of those free radicals and chlorophyll from the very beginning. And so we think that some of the technology that we developed around the hemp heart protein and the hemp heart oil is going to allow us to enter a much larger market. So we've been trialing deep in deep trials with some of the biggest ingredient distributors across the country, as well as a lot of your favorite plant-based food companies that have recently made waves on the public stock market. They're adapting their products to take advantage of this tectonic shift in the way people are eating. We have meat eaters across the world now that are still meat eaters, but they want a burger that doesn't have any beef. They want fillets without the feather, and they want tuna without the fins. And so we're able to get them this ingredient that's in a format that formulators can now make these products that consumers have been asking for years and years. And we feel like this is this is a little bit of the tipping point for the hemp food industry. And so when I'm here, and this is advocacy for I don't know, for me, for certain. Being out here from Kentucky, and I share, I come out here to share a message of this plant can do a lot of things, and we're all freaking out about CBD because you can get rich, you can pay for your farm in a month and retire. Like, it's great, you can buy the Salton Sea. But keep in mind, there's cyclical diversity hits every single agricultural commodity. Dairy farmers up in Vermont and across the country are in dire straits now, and they're foreclosing on farms and equipment. So think twice before you buy that $1.4 million CO2 extractor. Certainly don't sign a personal guarantee on it. There's certainly a lot out there that you can borrow time on, right? And keep in mind that this plant also exhibits incredible characteristics with the seed and the fiber. So hopefully everyone comes to this conference as an advocate of let's bring this crop into the rotation in a responsible manner with a 10-year horizon, not how much can I make, in the next growing season, So keep that in mind, I guess.
Yeah, in talking about having a long-term perspective on the plant, what's going to get you money for 1 year, what's going to earn you money 20 years from now. I'll jump to Matt with kind of the same question before we get back to CBD. Can you talk a little bit about the decortication process of the hemp fiber and then some of the markets you feel are open to that fiber?
Sure. The interesting thing with the fiber industry, the textile industry, and Larry has a decade or more experience than I do in this, is that the United States hasn't produced textile grade hemp fiber for 60 years, let's say, at the low end. Some of the initial developments of the decorticator were actually in Imperial County, and I think Chris Boucher spoke to that earlier. There were hundreds of thousands of fiber hemp being grown in California in the 1800s. But currently, there's really not an up and running fiber processing plant in the U.S. And it's not as simple as just importing technology from China either. In that, one, we lack some of the hand labor force. Also, in some respects, we have more stringent environmental concerns and regulations. So when you look at growing a fiber crop, again, if it's even a secondary crop from your CBD production, the important point is to get the moisture content low, to either square or round bale it. It goes through a decorticator, which essentially separates the outer bast fiber from the inner woody core. Actually, the textile, just blowing up here. The textile grade fiber is only really about 10% of the stalk biomass. So, we can sit here and talk about fiber, but really the market in terms of, how much biomass is in the stalk is really in the woody core or the hurd. But once you have the bast fiber separated from the hurd and you have it in at least, an inch and a half in length, you can send it to wet processing, have the lignin removed, get it to a dry point where it's ready to go into combing and carding. And at that point, you have infrastructure on the East Coast that's able to work with it. It might be, a wet processing facility in Pennsylvania or the Carolinas, but there are some of the larger mills, spinning mills, that are starting to implement 10 to 20% hemp fiber into some of their blends. It could be a tri-blend with polyester. It could be, a 70% Pima or organic cotton blended with hemp fiber. And we've actually had trials up to like a 20 single yarn. So effectively, a fine enough yarn that you can create like a t-shirt jersey knit material from it. But essentially it comes down to, proper harvesting, decortication, wet processing, carding, combing, spinning, and then from there the product can actually come back to places like LA where you could make the fabrics and do the cut and sew and everything else. So it's a very thorough process to go from stalk in the field to a t-shirt on the rack.
All right, thank you, Matt. And for Mark and Eric, would you be willing to discuss the different methods of extraction that are available, and then talk about the differences in the product from kind of a crude extraction all the way to CBD isolate?
So there's various methods. Generally, most people are using ethanol extraction, either cryo or traditional. That is going to be your first pass once the biomass has been dried and it's ready to extract. That's going to get you to a crude oil that's roughly 30% CBD, maybe even higher. From there, you're going to winterize and decarb that crude. Some people will have drying and processing prior to extraction that will actually decarb the CBD molecule, which is taking it from CBDA to CBD, which is ultimately what where you want to be. But yeah, so the winterization and decarbing happens after the crude process. From there, it'll go through white film distillation. There's other reactor technologies that are out there as well that basically separate the remaining plant material from the valuable cannabinoid, and that'll get you to a distillate. 70 to 80% generally, depending on your input material. And then from there, you can either take it to an isolate, which uses pressure technologies to basically, you essentially add a solvent into your ethanol mix, or excuse me, your cannabinoid mix. And once it freezes and pressurizes, it pulls it out. And then you can also go to THC-free distillate from there, which is usually using chromatography, which pulls out anything that is not the CBD into its own kind of waste stream, and then thereby has a THC-free distillate that is roughly 90%. It can even be higher than that. There's various other methods to do it and different kind of processes and flows, but that's kind of a general high level.
Yep, that pretty much covers the process from extraction to crystallization. Just so I don't repeat anything he said, I'll just touch on the different types of extraction. I think we're both on the ethanol side of extraction because it's scalable, because it's not a pressurized method, such as CO2 or hydrocarbon. That puts limitations on your batch size, and in economy of scale like we're dealing with in hemp, that just doesn't work. These CO2 extractors in China are just massive, and they're 10 to 100 millions of dollars. I mean, they're just massive. Just to give you an idea of what a CO2 extractor that can extract maybe 20 pounds at a time, that's going to run you about $500,000, something that small. So that's more geared towards the kind of craft THC side of the industry, which is dealing with smaller batches, which is really concentrating on getting those terpenes out that they can back add later in the formulation. Because let's face it, that's mainly a vape market. Well, not mainly. That's dwindling too, day by day. But terpenes are still going to be important in your formulation, even if they're not inhaled, because they have synergistic effects with the cannabinoids. That's another topic. But likewise, hydrocarbon, now you're dealing with, instead of a fire suppressant like CO2, now you've got big explosion hazard, which varies, the legalities vary by municipality. So every city has their own take on hydrocarbon extractions. Most don't allow it. It's called Class 7 volatile extractions. And it's a safety concern. I prefer cryoethanol because when you get it that low in temperature, it's the flammability goes down, the flash point goes down, and it's much less of a safety hazard. It's a very effective solvent. If you cool it that low, it doesn't extract the molecules that you don't want as much as cannabinoids. So it's pretty effective. Capital costs are much lower than CO2. Otherwise, there are physical methods of extraction like screw presses, okay, bubble hash or water hash, rosin presses, which you're just physically smashing it and squeezing the oil out. Those are marketed as solventless, and they have a whole there's people that are diehard fans of solventless live rosin and stuff like that. So it depends on who you're marketing to. But as far as hemp goes, we're pretty much going towards full spectrum hemp oil or isolate. And like Mark said, to get that THC-free hemp oil, you have to do some remediation, which usually is chromatography. A lot of people are doing dilution now. Basically, you can just basically dilute down the percentage of THC so that's under 0.3 by adding isolate back to a base oil that you pretty much have taken from a waste stream of the crystallization process. It's easier to do remediation on small amounts of solvent than it is huge amounts, so that's why it's kind of attractive to do a dilution method, but chromatography is still involved. So that's just an idea of different types of extraction methods and how to get to the end product, keep the THC under 0.3. Am I missing anything?
The only thing that I wonder about, and I'm not a CBD expert, but doctor, maybe you could illuminate the conversation around synthetics and how synthetics are going to play a role in maybe giving the CBD isolate market a run for their money.
Well, the problem with synthetics is if there's a thing called isomerism in chemistry, and your body wants a certain type of CBD, and it's basically the 3D orientation of the molecules in the 3D orientation of the atoms in the molecule, and they fit in the receptors in a certain way. When you synthesize CBD or THC or anything else, you have these isomers and enantiomers that don't fit in the receptors as they should. And so they'll either be ineffective or they'll produce, off-target results. So there's been an influx of synthetic CBD, which is really driving the market price down, and most of it's coming from China. And so I highly recommend sourcing your CBD if you're, say, producing a brand and buying bulk. Get it from an American producer, local, that comes from hemp and is not synthetically produced.
Very good, thank you. My next question is going to have to deal with the equipment that is needed to do the various processing for the seeds, for the CBD, or for the fiber. Do you feel that this equipment is already available or easily modified for what's available, or do you think there's going to have to be a lot of innovation in that field to work directly with hemp? And I'll go down the line. So Chad?
Yeah, so there's a lot of good existing equipment. We've gone through a few combines, we've burnt up a few rotor combines, and the best outcome for us usually comes with a Walker style combine. The Klaus makes a good unit. There's also technology that's been developed over in Europe by Hemp Flax. Hemp Flax has some equipment that they've been using for a while. And then there's another company here in the United States that Matt mentioned earlier, Formation Ag. Formation Ag's been tackling the problem of equipment, and they have implements that you hook onto a tractor as opposed to combining, and that's more respectful of the flower and the CBD. There's a lot less damage that happens as you run it through the combine. So as far as in field, we plant with the seed drill, so John Deere box drill, we plant dense plant populations of 30 pounds per acre, and there's roughly 20,000 pounds or 20,000 seeds per pound, so you can do the math on how many plants. It needs to be pretty precision. As far as in our processing facility, yeah, it's all off the shelf stuff. It's a matter of how you configure it, and you're going to gain little efficiencies, and the difference between 5% yield is the difference between black and red in our business, because it's commodity agriculture processing. So yeah, there's different equipment out there that works better, and I think that was one of the learning curves that I had. 2015 when I got started in this, I had to buy a bunch of wheat, legumes, soy processing equipment and figure out what would work. And so we had to change out the screens, we had to figure out the vibratory sequences, change the air patterns a little bit, and we figured out what worked for us. And then come doing that for a year, we realized that we didn't know anything and we were doing it wrong. And then we talked to guys that had been doing it for years up in Canada, where they've been processing hemp foods, and we learned a lot more and scrapped some of that equipment or mothballed it and bought new equipment. And we'll probably continue to go through this process and spend a lot of money on equipment that we don't eventually need. That's just kind of the name of the game. If you're a processor, you're going to be continuously upgrading, and stainless steel doesn't appreciate. Just keep that in mind when you're thinking about buying that big piece of equipment. If you can lease it and you can send it back to the manufacturer, or if you can get them to run trials, almost every manufacturer I've worked with will take our material and they'll run trials, and they're happy to do it, and they're all happy to start working with them because they know what's coming and they want new markets as well. So if you have some material, you got an idea, you say, I wonder how these spiral separators work. I wonder how that gravity tables, might play with my variety of seed, and if it's going to separate the flower from the seed a little bit better. If I can get these stems out with, a screener, like you can send that material to most manufacturers and agriculture manufacturers, and they'll probably give you a free run on their equipment. And working with technicians who know how their equipment works is always the way to go.
It's kind of two trains. There's the equipment that is kind of being scaled at the moment that's coming out of the cannabis industry. So roto evaporators, various white film distillation pieces of equipment that used to be small batch, 10 pound, 20 pound, kind of select handcrafted stuff. That's now kind of increasing the capacity up to 1,000 pounds a day or 2,000 pounds a day. And then there's a whole slew of technologies coming out of traditional industry. So a lot of oil-based, refinement, corn, soy, canola oil, olive oil, things like that. So there's kind of a mixture of equipment that is being developed specifically for hemp because it does pose such a different challenge than other crops, other processes. So it's kind of a mixed bag there. Yeah.
I see a lot of techniques being adapted from the beer industry, especially when, as it pertains to ethanol extraction. They're really great at fabricating stainless steel vessels, large ones, add a little bit of agitation in a jacket, and you've got an ethanol extractor. And so there's a lot of beer companies jumping in the game and selling equipment to cannabis and hemp extractors. But also the cannabis industry is pushing forward technologies itself. Whereas rotary evaporators used to, do the job on a smaller scale, it's another type of batch process that just doesn't scale. And so now you see cannabis companies, selling really great evaporators that are continuous flow that really solve the evaporation problem, because ethanol takes a lot of solvent. You have to get rid of that solvent, you have to evaporate it so it doesn't form a bottleneck in your production facility. So there's been a lot of innovation in falling film evaporators. I have worked with a stainless steel vessel fabricator, and they've been more than happy to give me everything I wanted in my crystallization vessel. And of course, then I find out, okay, hey, can we take your design and sell it? That was my fault. Can we sell this to the cannabis industry? So a lot of companies out there will be more than happy to work with you and bend over backwards to give you exactly what you want in a piece of equipment. And then they want to, because they want to enter the cannabis industry because it's so lucrative. I see this in every state as they come online, and they would be more than willing to form partnerships with you if you can show them how to make a piece of equipment. So there's a lot of opportunities out there to be involved, even if you don't have a fabrication facility. If you have some ideas, someone would be willing to, make those ideas happen, and then you could beta test. And there's all kinds of things you could do, but.
Yeah, whether it's infield harvesting or fiber processing, and probably in the same respect some of the operations that these guys got to go through to get their shelf-ready product. I think there's some key ideas around what we're talking about. Obviously, there's going to need to be some modification, some innovation. Kind of exploring what's been working outside of the country, because there's been industries flourishing, developing for decades, centuries. If you're talking about Canada versus China or Europe. Also, there's just good old-fashioned American pragmatism. It's like what works, and we just need to solve the problem and come up with solutions. And sometimes that requires kind of being a bricoleur, if you will, to use a term from Levi-Strauss, which is like just grabbing what you can and putting it together and making it work. I think the other kind of bottleneck in this industry is actually an investment. So there's a lot of innovators out there. In terms of fiber, there's guys like Trey Riddle, who's not here today, or John Lupian, formerly of Bascor, guys that have kind of solved this problem, but don't have the capital behind them to actually build out the processing facility or to make it work. So there's stuff that will work, such as like if you have a problem in the field, like where you're losing trichrome or CBD yields, like you can look to something like Pure Hemp and Bish Enterprises. They've just made a self-contained unit. Now, obviously, it's not going to work in field. You have to cut and go through this. Or like if you have wet material that's clogging up your header, like you can go out and use a draper header, cut it, lay it, field ret, and then process. So it's really a matter of like trial and error right now, and trying to keep that scaled down so you lose less and more is probably a good idea.
All right, and I'll add a little bit to the fiber end of it. Seems with the fiber, there's already equipment out there that's available to work with it, and the process is, first thing that you're going to want to do is decorticate the stock. The equipment for decortication, for the most part, is not made in the United States. I've only seen it made in Europe at this time, and I've also seen smaller equipment made in China. Now, that equipment in China can be bought for as little as about $4,000 or $5,000 for a little hand decorticator, but that's not going to be sufficient for a real operation. In order for the fiber to really take off, it's going to require hundreds and thousands of acres because the people that are going to need that fiber need lots of it. They're going to need tons of it in order to work in their system, and it's going to have to go on the economy of scale. So in the scenario of fiber, in the olden days, the farmers used to actually decorticate the fiber themselves with the equipment that they had, and then they would sell the separated herd or fiber to the market. Today, it's probably going to be more likely that a factory would have to be built. The factory would have to be near the area where the hemp is grown, because moving the stalks around is not going to be really efficient. I would say probably within a 50-mile range, maybe 100 at the most, in order to be able to get the stalks to the plant that can do the decortication. Then, once the fiber is separated, the core fiber and the herd fiber, the actual next thing you're going to need is you're going to want to do, and the term is called reduction. And what this means is that the people that are buying the fiber, they're going to be very specific to the length of the fiber they're going to need. They're also going to be very specific to the quality in terms of how well the fiber and core herd is separated, and also the deviation of it. And what I found, I sell fiber right now at my company, and we get calls from all different types of manufacturers now, even more now today than at any other time. And they will say, gee, for our process, what we're using, we need all our hemp fiber to be 1¼ inch. And you need to guarantee it's going to be, and it cannot be that much bigger or that much littler. The very next phone call could be a manufacturer that's going to tell you they need the fiber to be 2 millimeters long. So the key here, the people that are going to be able to make the money, they're going to be able to have to do the decortication, and then they're also going to have to be able to do that reduction and be able to supply that fiber at the different lengths to the different customers that are out there. But once you can do that, once you can get it to that length, supply them with clean fiber, it's going to be in the tons and tons of fiber constantly, as they have factories that are operating usually 365 days a year. So it's going to take a while to get there because we need the investment, we need the people to be able to get the equipment, bring it here, modify it, and do it, or use existing equipment that's already here and use it for different industries. But I do believe that fiber is going to be the largest industry of hemp in the future right now. So we're going on, we've got about 20 more minutes left, and I'm kind of running out of questions. So I was wondering if anyone in the audience had any questions or would like to talk about post-processing or growing hemp, or talk to any of these people here, or if any of you guys had other questions you might want to ask of each other. All right, putting me on the spot here. All right, what do you guys think is going to be the future then of, for you, the seed industry? Where do you see it going, or where do you see it ending up? Where do you see the CBD industry ending up? And Matt, where do you see the fiber industry ending up?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. Where is the seed market in terms of? And I'm gonna address that from the standpoint of genetics. We have really lousy genetics in the U.S. We have really lousy genetics, I would say, from hemp grain perspective, from a number of different characteristics that the plant exhibits that don't get us far enough down the road. If you look at, if you look at like corn and soy, the yields have been tremendous. We've experienced tremendous growth since the 80s, even up into the 80s. The amount of acreage that has been planted and the acceleration of yields has been dramatic. And certainly some of that's been with GE, but there's also been a lot that's just been accomplished through selection of genetics, and hybridization is one technique. CRISPR is another technique. There's lots of techniques to get there, but we have very, very low-hanging fruit right now with regard to what our genetic characteristics are. You're lucky to achieve a 800 to 1,000 pound yield on an acre of grain right now, and we don't have regionally acclimated genetics that are available in, say, I don't know, Imperial County. If we wanted to start growing a grain crop, we're going to be pulling a grain out of, let's say Kentucky. And it's not going to have the same characteristics growing down here because of the latitude. It's just not going to replicate the same. So the genetic space is a wide open blank slate. 75% of all grain that's grown in Canada is 3 cultivars. And that's not because there's some heavy-handed Monsanto mentality up there. It's because they're reliable and redundant cultivars that they get good results with. If you go to Kentucky and you look at those same cultivars, you have plants that are 5 foot tall all the way up to 8 foot tall. Now, if you're sitting in a combine, that is a hell of a challenge for a combiner to get a clean harvest out. So there's all sorts of challenges that we face right now with regards to genetics. As I mentioned earlier, in Europe, they're harvesting crops that have 2 to 3% CBD, and there's flour, or there's grain in there, and there's fiber in there. Can we take that further? Can we increase the CBD levels? Can we increase the CBG or CBN or whatever it is levels in there? Can we stop the seed from shattering? Right now, we lose about 20 to 30% of our harvest on the ground because the seed doesn't hold in its pod. We're doing research with the University of Kentucky, and they say, yep, it shatters. It shatters a lot, right? But who's addressing that challenge right now? I don't see many people stepping to the plate, but that seems to me to be pretty low-hanging fruit with regard to where the genetics can go. Can we produce a seed that has bigger kernels? We see grain coming out of China that has maybe 16,000 seeds per pound as opposed to like the 23,000 seeds per pound that we're traditionally, have access to. And I don't think that that's for any reason other than we don't have a very mature genetics program here in the States. So I think it's a great opportunity. I think the most of the genetics that are being available to us right now are garbage, quite frankly. I think that the guys that are involved in getting those genetics out are learning as they go, and they have genetic lines that come from either Europe or Asia, and they're replicating them, and they're doing a pretty good job. But I think that if there's any geneticists in the room, there's a lot of opportunity to start doing some hybridization and crossbreeding around listening to. And I think the first thing we kind of talked about was talk to your market, talk to your processor, your buyer, and see what he wants. I know exactly what we want. We want a bigger kernel for less money, right? Because that allows us to compete more directly with soy and pea protein, which is our number one, our competition in the marketplace. So I think there's a large conversation to be had around seed, and I think genetics is a great opportunity for someone to dig in deep.
Future of CBD space. It's a loaded question. We're still at the very beginning, and that's everything from genetics, not just on the seed side, but on the actual cannabinoid side, all the way through to processing, and then ultimately the finished product that is produced from this crop. From a seed perspective and genetics perspective, right now everyone's focus is CBD, but there's hundreds of other cannabinoids in the plant, many of which are infinitesimally small in terms of how they appear, maybe 0.1% or 0.05%, versus a CBD might be 10 or 12%. So there just hasn't been enough research and practical application of some of these rare cannabinoids. Call it CBG, CBN, THCV, CBDV, and so I think as that evolves, and institutes of higher learning get involved and really start to research what is capable, I think that's going to fundamentally transform the space, and it'll probably happen several times as each new cannabinoid and kind of the research comes out and things are backed and peer reviewed. I think that it's going to change the practical applications. So right now, it's kind of the next piece. I mean, it's tinctures, it's gel caps, it's topical lotions. I could see a day where CBD is just it's about in just about everything. Kind of similar to sugar, like the former speaker was saying. But that's going to take time. I think there's still a good portion of the country, if not in the world, that doesn't even really know about CBD, or if they do, they've heard about it once and they kind of brushed it off and they haven't really looked back into it. So I think the growth potential is certainly there, and the potential applications are certainly there from the cannabinoid side to really continue to drive the kind of innovation side of this industry, and to do new things and to push the envelope. And that's certainly what we're going to do at Primordia. On the fiber side, I tend to agree with you. I think in the long run, the fiber could actually become the largest segment of this industry. But like Matt pointed out earlier, the processing's not there. And to do a bioplastic facility, it's north of $100 million. So there's a significant amount of CapEx that's going to go into a project like that. And right now, there isn't a market to kind of warrant that kind of spend. But that will change as well. So, we're talking batteries, we're talking, replacements for traditional commodities. We could spend all day talking about the potential here, but, it really is something that's exciting and promising. So I'm just happy to be a part of it.
So I think scientific data and clinical trials are going to really push the market as we figure out why these molecules, CBD and minor cannabinoids, are having the effect that they are on our bodies. The NIH has just funded a bunch of studies on CBD, which is great news. So, hopefully we'll learn a lot more about how this works, why it works. We have a lot of anecdotal data. A lot of people benefit from CBD, but we don't really know why. But what we are starting to understand is that it's not just CBD that is having these great effects, and that just goes to show why full spectrum hemp oil has such a higher value than CBD isolate right now. Is because people want those minor cannabinoids. Why? Is there an entourage effect between cannabinoids? Well, that term was really coined by the interaction between terpenes and THC, but is there a synergistic effect between CBD and, for example, CBG? And people are starting to understand that the answer is yes, but we need clinical trials and data to understand why. But the market is driving that, and that's why we're starting to see type 4 cannabis cultivars now, which is cultivars that have CBG, no CBD, or THC. Because the CBDA synthase gene has been knocked out or bred out, and now you have another type of cannabis, whereas before there was just 1 through 3, 1 being high THC, low CBD, type 2 being roughly equal ratios THC and CBD, and type 3 being high CBD, low THC. Now we have type 4, which is CBG, and it qualifies as hemp still because it needs to be only below 0.3 THC to be considered hemp. So you buy your type 4 CBG seeds from a hemp seed retailer, and so then we'll be able to much easily purify CBG, and so it's going to be driven by one, clinical data, scientific evidence, purification methods, I think, so that we can have these pure isolates. You know, it's exciting that now we're able to get CBN in its isolated form for about $40 a gram, which is pretty exciting considering, you know, it was hundreds of dollars about a year ago. So as these isolates become more available, we'll be able to do, you know, targeted studies, because it's really hard to do a really, you know, robust study when you have all these other cannabinoids kind of convoluting your results. So purification methods to get these, also genetics will help. So I think it comes from seed all the way to the lab. You need genetics, you need funded research, and you need purification. And then we can figure out why these cannabinoids work in the way they do, and we'll have a specific regimen of cannabinoids for whatever ails you.
Yeah, once again, I'm pretty much just in agreement with these guys have said here. Obviously, this industry is evolving kind of at a lightning pace right now. You know, we're sitting here majorly talking about CBD, and you know, this is the type 4 CBG right here. And so this is 13% CBG, non-detectable, THC, non-detectable CBD. So, you know, there's thousands of acres of this in Oregon versus thousands of acres of CBD in California. Regarding fiber, it's across the board. You know, we're really struggling with the breeding. Obviously, most of the fiber cultivars are certified cultivars coming from China, Europe, elsewhere outside of the country. But, you know, is that even a viable market for American farmers? Like, can you go out in most parts of the country and, you know, gross 500 to 1,000 an acre growing hemp fiber? Maybe that works in Imperial in the summer where it's so hot that you might not even have cannabinoid production. Or maybe it's just something that needs to be a byproduct of grain and CBD or cannabinoid production. And so it comes from genetics, innovation, infrastructure, investment, and then ultimately, you know, we need market leaders. So I'm sure everyone's seen, like, you know, the marketing and propaganda coming from places like Patagonia, but still, those hemp apparel products, none of them are sourced from domestic fiber. No one has brought a domestic fiber product to market yet. And that's because no one's put their dollars there. And so that's really what it comes down to.
All right. Thank you, guys. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about what Chad was saying about the genetics. And I'll throw out some numbers to let you know kind of where we were, where we are now, and what the potential is. Back in the year 1913, the U.S. Department of Agriculture did a study on hemp, and they did the USDA yearbook on hemp. And at that time, they were really looking at the hemp for fiber because that was the main crop. And they went to Kentucky, and they did the research, and they found that in 1913, the farmer was able to get 17.8 tons of hemp stock per acre. That's back in 1913. Now we move over to the year 2019, where we've kind of not had hemp for many years. I was up in North Dakota last week, and they were growing a little bit of hemp for fiber, and they were only getting about 2 to 3 tons per acre. because it actually lost that ability to have the right kind of genetics and even the knowledge to grow it properly. Now, what is the future of this? If you were to look in every single crop, or I should say every single major crop that was grown in America, for example, corn, barley, oats, wheat, rye, all of them together, if you look at the Department of Agriculture, they can actually give you per decade the yield that you were getting per acre. And what happened was for hundreds of years, the yields were fairly stable, but starting around the 1940s, the yields began to rise. And that was a result of proper breeding, getting the right breed of the plants that you were working with. Also harvesting techniques, growing methods, and fertilizers, things like that. And from 1940 to 2010, the average increase in every single crop, now, like I said, this is the average, not the high or the low, but the average was 143% that it actually improved. So if we're looking at hemp in 1913, it was growing 17.8 tons per acre. If we just took that average, if we really applied modern technology to hemp, all the breeding and everything, we could probably expect to get about 34 tons per acre of biomass from the hemp plant if grown for fiber. And at that rate, it will actually be producing about 3 to 4 times more than that, I think, practically almost 10 times more than what you can get from trees per acre in terms of biomass. So I wanted to kind of put that out there to say exactly where this can go and what the potential is. We can also apply that to CBD generation or other cannabinoids and also to the grain. Right now, average seed size is about maybe 2 or 3 millimeters. I've actually seen hemp seeds that were as big as peas before from one strain somewhere. But if we could get that particular strain in the hands of somebody like Chad, you're going to see the cost of the hemp oil going way down, the cost of the protein going way down. And when that happens, all the markets are going to be opening up quite readily. And this is going to become a bigger and bigger crop as we move forward. All right, so we have 3 minutes left. Once again, you guys, great job. I know this is a little bit tech heavy, what we were talking about, so thank you, audience, for listening the whole time for all of this. But I wanted to know any other questions for the gentleman we have up here. Otherwise, it looks like we got about a half-hour break.
We have a question in the back.
Yeah. Oh, we do? Who has one?
Good evening. I think my question is like all these great things that are happening, with this product. I think we're missing a marketing component and getting it out to the consumers. Like, where are we at with that? Because we can do this, but if people aren't getting better, then we're missing it.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because I began talking about hemp back in 1990, and usually the first question I got was, I'd show them a hemp t-shirt or hemp fabric, and I'd be asked, can you smoke it? Or people would say, oh, you just want hemp because you want marijuana, and that would be it. That's mostly gone away, but I still run into, I was just at the bank about 2 weeks ago, and they still had no idea what hemp was. I talked about industrial hemp, and they thought I was talking about marijuana. So, marketing and education has got to be a lot more important in that regard. And you other guys want to answer that a little bit?
The big issue right now is that Google and Facebook do not allow hemp-based advertising. So, your primary marketing channel is not there.
Okay.
There's obviously a lot that's being done directly to consumers, with mailing lists and events, things like that. But, until you kind of unlock the power of, getting in front of people from a search engine perspective or on the social media channels, I think that we're definitely going to see stunted growth because of that. There is the Safe Banking Act that just passed through Congress. I think it was last week or
Okay.
a few days ago, and that opens up the banking for both cannabis and hemp. So I think that's part of the issue with Facebook and Google is that they don't want to transact with companies.
Our Times is calling for game-changing.
Kind of the gray area there. So it's evolving quickly, and hopefully in the next few months that will change.
I just wanted to put it out there because if we're doing this, it just makes no sense if we're putting all this money into producing it, but we can't do the processing part of getting it out to the consumers and really seeing people's lives change. It's just like eating healthy. You know what I mean? If I'm going to go organic, I'm going to stay with organic. I'm not going to go to organic and then go eat at McDonald's. You know what I mean? So we have to change the mindset of people when we're presenting this because it's a really shift in a mindset. Don't look at it as just the money. Look at it as that people's lives are going to change from this. The pharmaceutical companies are going to get mad at us because we're changing people's lives. Thank you.
Yeah, well said. I think a lot of it comes back to education. Obviously, trying to reverse the stigma, not just with how it's been associated with cannabis, but obviously like marginalized communities, people of color. I mean, we have obviously a lot of Latinos working with us, and most of those individuals think that we're growing mota, and it's like, no, this is cáñamo. This is algo diferente, It doesn't have a high associated with it, and it's something that like, your abuelita, your grandma might have been growing it generations ago and applying it on your pains on your body, but now because of the drug war, like you've disassociated from that past. So it really does come back to our roots and our origins, I think.
All right, so let's have a big round of applause for all of the panelists here. And I just got a little note, before we conclude, we're going to feature a brief video from one of the top sponsors of this event, World Yow. So, take it.
Our Times is calling for game-changing transformations, and our world today is